Today we are going to continue our discussion about Abraham. And like I mentioned yesterday, we're going to jump into the New Testament. Turn over to Romans chapter 4. In Romans chapter 4, we're going to start in verse 3. It says, "For what does the scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him for righteousness." Remember, we talked about that yesterday. "Now to him that works is the reward not reckoned of grace, but of debt." Okay, that's King James for if you work at a job, when you get paid, you're not getting paid because somebody just wanted to give you a gift. You're getting paid because you worked for it. You earned it. That's your wage. "But to him that works not, but believes on him that justifies the ungodly, his faith is counted for righteousness." Paul is saying that our righteousness is given as a gift. We don't work for it. He's laying this out that your righteousness with God is not something that you can earn. You can't get there by being good. This is something that there are a ton of people in church who misunderstand righteousness, and they've got this idea that I have to be good, I have to be perfect. Paul is saying right here very clearly, and I mean he just takes the gloves off right away, and he says, it's not about being perfect. It's not about being good. It is about righteousness is something that you can't earn. The only thing that you can do is to believe. He says, if you believe, if you have faith, if you trust, then you receive righteousness as a gift. Even as David also describes the blessedness of the man upon whom God imputes righteousness without works, because he said, "Blessed are they whose iniquities are forgiven and whose sins are covered. Blessed is the man to whom the Lord will not impute sin." Paul is quoting David here, and David said, you are blessed if God gives you grace. And then Paul blows the Jews out of the water here by saying, does this blessedness come upon the circumcision only? Does only the Jews get that kind of blessedness? Does it only come for the uncircumcision? Because we say that faith was reckoned to Abraham for righteousness, how was it then reckoned? How did Abraham get righteousness? Did Abram get righteousness when he was circumcised or when he was uncircumcised? And then Paul says, neither one. He received the circumcision as a seal of the righteousness of the faith which he had before he was circumcised. In the 12th verse he says, "And the father of circumcision to them who are not of the circumcision only, but who also walk in the steps of that faith of our father Abraham, which he had being yet uncircumcised. For the promise that he should be the heir of the world was not to Abraham or to his seed through the law, but through the righteousness of faith. For if they which are of the law be heirs, faith is made void, and the promise made of none effect, because the law works wrath, for where no law is, there is no transgression. Therefore it is of faith, that it might be by grace, to the end the promise might be sure to all the seed, not to that only which is of the law, but to that also which is of the faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all." Paul is laying out here that God asked Abraham to trust him, and because Abraham trusted him, he was made righteous. And Paul is making the case that just as Abraham was made righteous by trusting God, we also can be made righteous by trusting God. If God did it for Abraham, God will do it for us. Paul just goes through the book of Romans and he explains it wasn't because Abraham got circumcised that he was made righteous. It was because he trusted God. Because he put his faith in God, God made him righteous. And then he was circumcised to show that he had been made righteous. But he wasn't made righteous by the things that he did. He was made righteous by the condition of his heart and in that faith and trust and submission to God. Paul is explaining to the Gentiles that the covenant that God made with Israel is the same covenant that he makes to everyone who will. Whosoever will, the verse that we have read many times. Paul is making that case that the only thing you need in order to be made righteous is submission to God and faith and trust in him. And let's skip over to Hebrews chapter 11, verse 8. So in Hebrews 11, this is what is generally referred to as the hall of faith. And all of the people here in this chapter, Paul is going through and he's explaining how these people were justified by their faith. That they did what they did through faith in God. They trusted in God and God blessed them, and that they did these things by their trusting in God. Hebrews 11:8 says, "By faith Abraham, when he was called to go out into a place which he should after receive for an inheritance, he obeyed, and he went out, not knowing whither he went." God said, "Go," and he said, "Okay," and he went. By faith, by trusting in God, he's sojourned. He went out into this land, to a strange country, and he lived in tents. He didn't have a regular house built. He was just living in a tent, because he was looking for a city whose foundations and builder and maker is God. Abraham was sent out by God saying, "Go out here and I'm going to make you a nation. I'm going to build you a city. I'm going to make of you something that you could never do on your own. But if you'll trust me, I'll do this for you. I'll take care of you. I will give you this land because you trust me." And so then he finishes up by saying, "And through faith also Sarah," because Sarah had faith as well, "she received strength to conceive seed." She was like 90 years old or 100 years old. And this happened, Paul says, because she judged him faithful who had promised. Therefore sprang there even one, and him as good as dead, so many as the stars of the sky in multitude, and as the sand which is by the seashore innumerable. That's King James for Abraham was able to make a child, and that child became this huge nation of people that were descended from his own DNA. And that was only because of God, and God did that because Abraham trusted him. This has some applications for us that are pretty humongous. I mean, if God can do that for Abraham, and if God is no respecter of persons, God will accept whosoever will, then we have access to God. This is Paul's whole thing. Paul goes on and on and on and on about how trusting God is the key to receiving righteousness with God. And if you're right with God, anything can happen. This is the beauty of the covenant. This is the beauty of what happened in Genesis 15, that God made a blood covenant with Abraham for no other reason than that Abraham trusted him. And Paul continues over and over to make this case that we have access to God in the exact same way. All right, so let's come back tomorrow. We'll talk some more about Abraham, and you have a good day.